The sun was setting when we arrived at the forest, casting a warm orange glow across the trees. My friends, Jake, Sarah, and Tom, were buzzing with excitement as we unloaded the car. We had planned this camping trip for weeks, eager to escape the chaos of our daily lives and reconnect with nature. The fresh air was invigorating, and the sounds of the forest were a welcome change from the city that as we set up our tents. Laughter echoed through the trees. Tom was in charge of the fire, while Sarah and Jake unpacked the food. I wandered a little deeper into the woods, taking in the sights and sounds. The towering trees loomed above me, their leaves whispering secrets in the wind. I felt a sense of peace wash over me, but it was short-lived. When I returned to the campsite, I noticed a change in the atmosphere. The laughter had quieted, and my friends were gathered around the fire, their expressions tense. "What's wrong?" I asked, sensing an unease that hung in the air. "Did you hear that?" Jake said, glancing into the shadows. It sounded like something was out there. I dismissed it at first, attributing it to the natural sounds of the forest. But as night descended, the forest transformed. The once welcoming woods became a maze of shadows and unfamiliar noises that as we sat around the fire, sharing stories and roasting marshmallows, the feeling of being watched crept in. I glanced around, half expecting to see someone lurking in the trees. But it was just the forest, dark and still, with only the crackling fire to break the silence. Hashtag as the night deepened, we told ghost stories, and the fire flickered ominously. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Every rustle of leaves sent shivers down my spine. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of movement, a shadow darting between the trees. "Did you see that?" I whispered to Sarah, who was sitting next to me. She nodded, her eyes wide with fear. "What if it's a bear?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I laughed it off, trying to lighten the mood. "It's probably just a raccoon or something," I replied, but deep down, the unease gnawed at me. After a while, we decided to take a short walk to stretch our legs. Armed with flashlights, we ventured into the dark forest, the beams of light cutting through the shadows. The trees loomed like giants, and every crack of a twig made us jump. Suddenly, we heard a low growl, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. "What was that?" Tom asked, his voice trembling. We froze, the flashlight beams shaking in our hands. The growl came again, closer this time, and our breath quickened. "We should go back," Jake suggested, panic rising in his voice. But before we could turn, a figure emerged from the shadows, a wolf, its eyes glowing in the dark. Hashtag, the wolf stood there, watching us, its body tense and poised. Fear gripped me, and I instinctively took a step back. "What do we do?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The wolf didn't move. It just stared, its gaze unblinking. We were frozen in place, caught in an unexpected standoff. "Back away slowly," Tom whispered, and we began to retreat, our hearts pounding in our chests. The wolf followed, maintaining its distance, but never breaking eye contact. It felt like a game, a primal dance between predator and prey. I could feel the weight of its gaze, a reminder that we were intruders in its territory, that as we hurried back to the campsite, the wolf continued to watch from the shadows, its presence haunting us. We reached the fire, breathing heavily, adrenaline coursing through our veins. "What the hell was that?" Sarah exclaimed, her voice shaky. "We need to stay close to the fire," I said, trying to sound calm, but inside, I was terrified. The night dragged on, and we huddled around the fire, casting anxious glances into the dark. The wolf's growl echoed in my mind, a chilling reminder of the wildness that surrounded us. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was out there, waiting for us to let our guard down. Hashtag as the hours passed, exhaustion began to take its toll. We tried to keep the fire going, but fatigue weighed heavily on us. Just when I thought we might finally get some rest, a howl pierced the night, reverberating through the trees. It was haunting, a sound that sent chills down my spine, that I glanced at my friends, their faces pale with fear. What if it's calling for more wolves? Jake whispered, his eyes wide. The thought sent a wave of panic through me. We need to stay together, I urged, my voice trembling. No one should wander off. But just as I said that, the fire flickered and a gust of wind blew through the campsite. The flames danced erratically, casting eerie shadows around us. I felt a growing sense of dread as I noticed the shadows shifting, the darkness closing in. We need to go, I said urgently. Now! Gathering our things, we prepared to leave. But as we turned to the path leading back to the car, the wolf stood at the edge of the clearing, its eyes glinting in the dim light. It was no longer just an observer. It was a guardian of the forest, and we were intruders. With a deep breath, I stepped forward, trying to assert my presence. We mean no harm, I said, my voice steady. The wolf tilted its head, studying me, and for a moment, the world fell silent. I felt a connection, a primal understanding that transcended fear. If sensing my intention, the wolf turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving us in stunned silence. What just happened? Sarah breathed, her voice a mix of awe and confusion. I didn't know how to explain it, but in that moment, I felt a strange sense of peace. Hashtag, we left the forest that night, forever changed by the encounter. The experience lingered in my mind like a vivid dream, a reminder of the wildness that exists just beyond our comprehension. As we drove away, I looked back at the trees, feeling a mix of gratitude and respect for the wilderness. In the days that followed, I shared our story with friends, but few understood the depth of what we experienced. The wolf became a symbol, a reminder that nature is both beautiful and terrifying. I realized that sometimes, facing our fears leads to unexpected connections, that if you ever find yourself in the wilderness, remember to respect the wild. There are forces beyond our understanding, and sometimes the most profound experiences come from confronting the unknown. The echoes of that night in the forest will stay with me forever, a testament to the power of nature and the bonds we share with it. The sun was setting as I drove through the quiet streets of a small Texas town. I had come for a weekend getaway, eager to explore the local sights and indulge in some much-needed relaxation. As I navigated the winding roads, I noticed a quaint little church at the end of a dusty lane. Its spires reached toward the sky, and a faded sign read, St. Augustine's Church. My curiosity piqued. I decided to stop and take a look. The church had an old-world charm, but there was something peculiar about it, a sense of foreboding that hung in the air. I parked my car and stepped out, the gravel crunching under my feet. The silence was palpable, broken only by the faint rustling of leaves in the breeze. As I approached the entrance, I noticed the intricate carvings on the wooden door. They depicted scenes of biblical stories, but something felt off about them. I shook off the feeling and pushed the door open, stepping inside. Hashtag, the interior was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of incense. Rows of pews stretched before an altar adorned with candles and odd symbols that I didn't recognize. Shadows danced along the walls, creating an unsettling atmosphere. I felt a chill run down my spine, but pressed onward, intrigued by the church's unique decor. The silence was almost deafening. I wandered further inside, my footsteps echoing through the empty space. It was then that I noticed a small congregation gathered at the front. They were dressed in dark clothing, their heads bowed in prayer. I hesitated, unsure if I should interrupt. Suddenly, one of the congregants looked up, their eyes locking onto mine. There was a strange intensity in their gaze, and a shiver ran through me. "Welcome," they said, their voice smooth yet unsettling. "Join us in prayer." I felt an inexplicable pull to stay, so I nodded and took a seat in a back pew. The group resumed their chanting, and I listened intently. The words were unfamiliar, almost like a language I couldn't place. The atmosphere grew thicker, and I felt as if I were being drawn into something I didn't fully understand. Hashtag, as the chanting continued, I started to feel lightheaded, a sense of disorientation washing over me. I glanced around the church, my unease growing. The symbols on the wall seemed to shift and swirl in my vision, and I struggled to focus. Just then, the leader of the congregation raised their arms, and the chanting grew louder. "We call upon the ancient spirits to guide us," they proclaimed, their voice reverberating through the room. My heart raced as I realized that this was no ordinary prayer service. That I stood up, my instinct screaming for me to leave. But as I turned to make my escape, the door slammed shut with a loud bang, trapping me inside. Panic surged through me as I looked back at the congregation, who were now fixated on me with eerie smiles. "Stay with us," one of them said, a glint of something dark in their eyes. "You are meant to be here." Hashtag, my mind raced as I searched for a way out. I dashed toward the windows, but they were barred, and the walls felt like they were closing in. The chanting intensified, and I could feel a presence pressing against me, suffocating me. Just when I thought all hope was lost, I noticed a side door that led to a small hallway. I sprinted toward it, adrenaline pumping through my veins. I pushed the door open and stumbled into the dark corridor, my heart pounding in my chest that I could hear the congregation behind me, their chants echoing off the walls. "You can't escape," they called. I ran down the hallway, desperately searching for an exit. The shadows seemed to reach out, trying to pull me back. Finally, I spotted a faint light at the end of the corridor. I raced toward it, my fear propelling me forward. As I reached the door, I pushed it open and burst outside into the cool night air. Hashtag, I collapsed on the grass outside, gasping for breath. The church loomed behind me, its dark silhouette against the night sky. I glanced back, half expecting to see the congregation following me, but the door remained closed. The experience haunted me long after I left that small town. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to me, or the memory of those unsettling chants. I shared my story with friends, but they dismissed it as an overactive imagination. But deep down, I knew what I had encountered was real. The darkness that lurked within that church would stay with me forever, a chilling reminder of the unknown. If you ever find yourself drawn to a strange place, remember to trust your instincts. Not every sanctuary is safe, and some doors are best left closed. The clock struck midnight as I clocked out of my shift at the diner. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glare that contrasted with the soft darkness outside. I was exhausted, the long hours weighing heavily on my shoulders. The streets were quiet, and the only sound was the distant hum of the highway. As I made my way to my CRDS, I stepped outside. A chill ran through the air, sending a shiver down my spine. I shrugged it off, attributing it to the late hour. I had taken this route countless times before, but tonight felt different. The shadows seemed to stretch longer, and the night felt heavier. That I climbed into my car, the leather seats cool against my skin. I turned the key in the ignition, and the engine roared to life. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone behind me. But the lot was empty, just the flickering light from the diner illuminating the darkness. The roads were mostly deserted, and I turned on the radio, searching for something to break the eerie silence. A static-filled station played a haunting melody, and I felt a sense of unease settle in. I shook my head, trying to focus on the road ahead, but the feeling of being watched lingered in the back of my mind. Hashtag, as I drove deeper into the night, the trees lining the road loomed like sentinels, their branches swaying in the wind. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, I half expected to see headlights behind me, but there was nothing, just darkness. Suddenly, my phone buzzed, jolting me from my thoughts. I picked it up, glancing at a message from a friend, but when I looked back up, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the road. My heart raced as I slammed on the brakes. The figure was a woman, her clothes tattered and her hair wild. She raised her hand as if to signal me to stop. "What the hell?" I muttered, my pulse quickening. I hesitated, torn between wanting to help and the instinct to drive away. But before I could make a decision, she turned and dashed into the woods, disappearing into the shadows. That I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. Just a trick of the light, I told myself. I shifted gears and drove off, but the encounter lingered in my mind. Who was she? Why was she out there alone at this hour? As I continued down the road, I glanced in the mirror again. For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw movement in the trees, but when I looked closer, there was nothing. The feeling of being watched intensified, and I could feel my anxiety creeping back in. Hashtag, the road stretched on, and I tried to shake off the discomfort. I turned up the music to drown out my thoughts, but the unsettling feeling only grew stronger. Every sound amplified in the stillness of the night. The rustling of leaves, the distant howl of the wind, and then the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me that I glanced in the rearview mirror, and my heart dropped. There, just behind my car, was a figure, a shadowy silhouette that seemed to follow me. Panic surged through me, and I pressed down on the accelerator, my breath coming in quick gasps. Just keep driving, I whispered to myself, but the footsteps grew louder, echoing in my mind. I turned a corner, hoping to lose whatever was pursuing me, but the figure remained, always just out of sight. Lurking in the darkness, that I took a deep breath and decided to pull into a nearby gas station, the flickering lights offering a sense of safety. I parked and jumped out, scanning the area for any sign of the figure. Nothing. The gas station was empty, its lights casting long shadows across the pavement. That I approached the door, but before I could push it open, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me. I turned abruptly, but again, there was no one there. The unease settled deep in my stomach, and I felt a cold sweat trickle down my back. I was not alone. Hashtag, determined to confront whatever was haunting me. I took a deep breath and stepped back into my car. I couldn't let fear dictate my actions. I turned the ignition and pulled out of the gas station. More resolved than ever to make it home, as I drove, I kept an eye on the road and the trees lining it, expecting to see the figure again. The night was quiet, but the feeling of being watched intensified. My heart raced with every passing moment, and I fought the urge to look in the mirror again. Then, just as I thought I might make it home without incident, the figure appeared again in the shadows at the side of the road. This time, I didn't hesitate. I slammed on the brakes, and the car skidded to a stop. The figure stepped into the light, revealing the woman from before, her expression frantic. "Help me," she cried, her voice filled with desperation. "They're coming for me?" Panic surged through me, but something in her eyes told me she wasn't lying. I couldn't leave her out there. "Get in," I shouted, and she dashed to the passenger side, climbing in just as I hit the gas pedal. "Go," she urged, her voice trembling. I didn't look back. I just drove, my heart pounding in my chest. Hashtag, after what felt like an eternity, I finally reached my neighborhood. I pulled into my driveway, my hands shaking on the wheel. The woman beside me was silent, her eyes darting around, as if expecting something to jump out at any moment. "Who were they?" I asked, my voice trembling. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "I don't know. I saw them in the woods. They were watching me." I nodded, my mind racing with thoughts of what might have happened if I hadn't stopped. "You're safe now," I said, trying to reassure her. "You can stay here until morning." As we sat in the car, the weight of the night began to lift. The shadows that had felt so oppressive now seemed distant. I had faced my fears and acted against the darkness that had haunted me in the days that followed. I shared my experience with friends, but they could hardly believe it. "You were just tired," they said, but I knew what I had encountered was real. The night had tested me, revealing a strength I didn't know I had. That if you ever find yourself in a situation where fear threatens to consume you, remember that courage can be found in the most unexpected moments. The darkness may be daunting, but sometimes all it takes is a small act of bravery to light the way home. I had admired Emily from afar for months. Her laughter was infectious, her smile radiant, and every interaction felt electric. So when she finally invited me over to her apartment, I could hardly believe my luck. I spent the entire day preparing, picking out the perfect outfit, and rehearsing how I would charm her as I made my way to her building in Manhattan. Excitement bubbled within me. The city was alive with energy, the neon lights reflecting off the glass skyscrapers. I arrived at her building, a quaint yet modern structure nestled among the towering giants. I buzzed her apartment, my heart racing as she greeted me with a warm smile at the door. "Hey, I'm so glad you came," she said, stepping aside to let me in. The apartment was cozy, filled with soft lighting and an inviting aroma of something delicious cooking in the kitchen. I felt at ease, and we quickly fell into easy conversation as we settled onto a plush sofa. Hashtag as we chatted, I noticed small details that began to unsettle me. The walls were adorned with framed photographs, but many were eerie, dark landscapes, unsettling imagery, and a few of Emily with a vacant expression. I brushed it off, thinking it was just an artistic choice that as the night wore on, I caught glimpses of strange items scattered around the apartment. An old, dusty book on the coffee table filled with cryptic symbols, and a collection of peculiar trinkets on a shelf. "What's this?" I asked, picking up a small figurine that resembled a grotesque creature. "Oh, just some stuff I collect," Emily replied, her voice light, but I detected a hint of discomfort. I set it down, feeling a chill run down my spine. The atmosphere shifted, and I tried to shake off the unease that was creeping in. "Let's watch a movie," she suggested, and I agreed, eager to distract myself from the strange feelings swirling in my head. But as the film played, I noticed that Emily seemed distracted, her gaze often drifting toward the window as if she were waiting for something or someone. Hashtag halfway through the movie, I excused myself to use the bathroom. As I walked down the hallway, I noticed a door slightly ajar at the end. Curiosity got the better of me, and I pushed it open. What I found made my stomach drop. The room was dark, the curtains drawn tight. It was filled with clutter, but in the center stood a large, unsettling mirror. Surrounding it were photographs, dozens of them, of people I recognized from the neighborhood, all taken without their knowledge. Some were smiling, others looked distressed, but all had one thing in common. They were all focused on Emily. My heart raced as I stepped back, realizing the implications. Why did she have these photos? What was she doing with them? Just then, I heard her voice calling from the living room. "Everything okay?" I quickly closed the door and returned to the couch, trying to mask my shock. "Yeah, just had to find a bathroom," I replied, my mind racing with questions. The atmosphere felt suffocating, and I could sense that I was on the edge of a precipice, teetering between attraction and horror. Hashtag as the night progressed, I couldn't shake what I had seen. I decided to confront her, hoping to understand the truth. "Emily, can I ask you something?" I said, my voice steady. "What's that room at the end of the hall?" Her expression shifted, a flicker of something dark crossing her face. "It's just a storage room," she said too quickly, her eyes darting away. "Nothing to worry about." But I pressed on. "It looked like more than that. Why do you have those photos?" The tension in the room thickened, and for a moment, silence enveloped us. That Emily's demeanor changed, and I could sense that the charming girl I had known was slipping away. "You shouldn't have gone in there," she said, her voice low and almost threatening. "You don't understand." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Then help me understand," I urged, desperation creeping into my voice. "What are you hiding?" Her eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of fear. "You need to leave," she said, standing abruptly. "Now!" Hashtag panic surged through me as I realized the gravity of the situation. I jumped up, my heart racing. "Wait, Emily, please." But she was already moving toward the door, blocking my exit. "Just go," she insisted, her voice rising. I could see the darkness in her eyes, a side of her I never imagined existed. My instincts kicked in, and I bolted past her. Racing toward the front door, I burst out into the night, the cool air hitting my face like a splash of cold water. I didn't stop running until I reached the street, my heart pounding in my chest. I glanced back at the apartment building, at the girl who had seemed so perfect just hours before. The truth was clear. I had stumbled into a nightmare, and the girl I once admired was hiding dark secrets. I vowed never to return. The haunting images of that night etched in my mind forever. That if you ever find yourself in a similar situation, trust your instincts. Sometimes, the allure of attraction can blind us to the darkness that lurks just beneath the surface. The echoes of that night would stay with me, a chilling reminder to always look beyond the facade. It was just past 10 p.m. when I decided to stay late at the office to finish up a project. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow that seemed to amplify the quiet around me. My colleagues had trickled out one by one, leaving me alone in the expansive, empty space of our Los Angeles office. As I sat at my desk, the rhythm of my typing echoed in the silence. I was focused, determined to meet the deadline looming over my head. The city outside was alive with nightlife, but inside the office, it felt like time had stopped. I took a sip of cold coffee, the bitter taste grounding me as I worked. Around midnight, I noticed a strange sound coming from the hallway, soft footsteps. I paused, glancing toward the door, but saw nothing, just the building settling. I reassured myself, shaking off a creeping sense of unease. I returned to my work, but the feeling lingered, gnawing at the edge of my consciousness. Hashtag as the clock ticked closer to 1 a.m., the atmosphere grew heavier. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sounds of the city, but every now and then, the soft footsteps returned, accompanied by a low whispering that sent chills down my spine. I stood up, peering into the hallway, but it was dark and empty. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing against the walls. Silence answered me. I returned to my desk, trying to focus, but the whispers grew louder, almost like they were beckoning me. I pulled out my phone, debating whether to call someone, but I didn't want to seem paranoid. Just then, the lights flickered, plunging the office into semi-darkness. I felt a jolt of fear. Come on, just a power surge. I muttered to myself, trying to maintain my composure. But the flickering lights only added to the eerie atmosphere. I grabbed my jacket, feeling the chill in the air. Hashtag determined to shake off the fear. I decided to take a short break. I stood up and walked toward the break room, hoping a snack and some fresh air would help clear my head. As I rounded the corner, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a shadow flitting across the hallway. "Who's there?" I called, my heart racing. No response. I stepped into the break room, forcing myself to breathe. I poured a glass of water and leaned against the counter, trying to calm down. But the unease settled back in, heavier than before. Suddenly, I heard a loud crash from the storage room nearby. I jumped, my heart pounding. "Is anyone in there?" I shouted, but the only answer was silence. Gathering my courage, I approached the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. As I opened the door, I was met with darkness. The storage room was dimly lit by a flickering bulb, and boxes were scattered across the floor. I stepped inside, the floor creaking beneath me. Then, out of nowhere, I heard that whisper again, clearer this time. "Help me." Hashtag, my blood ran cold. "Who's there?" I demanded, but no one answered. I backed away slowly, the feeling of dread washing over me. Just as I turned to leave, the door slammed shut behind me. Panic surged through me as I fumbled with the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "Let me out," I shouted, my voice echoing off the walls. I pounded on the door, desperation clawing at my throat. Then, I heard it again, soft footsteps approaching from the darkness. I spun around, heart racing, and there she was. A woman stood in the shadows, her face pale and gaunt. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice haunting and filled with sorrow. "They're watching." "Who are you?" I asked, trembling. "What do you mean?" She stepped closer, and I could see the fear in her eyes. "They took me. You have to leave before it's too late." Before I could ask more, the lights flickered violently, and I felt a rush of cold air. The woman vanished in a thin air, leaving me alone with my racing heart and a growing sense of dread. Hashtag, finally, I managed to pry the door open, stumbling back into the hallway, gasping for breath. I didn't look back. I sprinted toward the exit, my pulse pounding in my ears. The whispers followed me, echoing through the empty office As I burst through the front door into the cool night air, I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but the fear still clung to me like a shadow. I glanced back at the office building, knowing it held secrets I couldn't comprehend. That in the days that followed, I tried to rationalize what happened. Was the woman a figment of my imagination? Had I truly heard whispers in the dark? But deep down, I knew the truth. The office was haunted by something sinister, and I had narrowly escaped its grasp. That if you ever find yourself working late in a seemingly ordinary place, remember that the darkness can hold unimaginable horrors. Trust your instincts and don't ignore the signs. The echoes of that night would stay with me forever, a chilling reminder of the unknown lurking just beyond the light. When my parents announced they were going away for the weekend, I was ecstatic. Finally, I would have the house to myself. I had plans to invite friends over, binge watch my favorite shows, and enjoy the freedom of being home alone. The moment they left, I felt a rush of excitement wash over me. The first evening went smoothly. I ordered pizza, cranked up the volume on the TV, and sprawled out on the couch. Everything felt perfect. The house filled with the comforting sounds of laughter and music. As night fell, I decided to take a break from the screen and relax with a book in my room. But as I settled into bed, I started to hear faint noises, soft thuds and creaks that echoed through the quiet house. At first, I brushed them off as the usual sounds of an old home settling. But as the noises grew louder, unease crept in. I tried to focus on my book, but my mind kept wandering to the strange sounds. Hashtag. By the time I decided to turn in for the night, I was on edge. I locked my bedroom door, convinced that the noises were just my imagination. But as I lay in bed, the unsettling feeling persisted. I could hear the faint sound of something scratching, like nails on wood, coming from the hallway. That I sat up, my heart racing. "It's just the wind," I whispered to myself, but the scratching continued. Gathering my courage, I got out of bed and opened the door, peering into the dark hallway. The house was silent, but the scratching had stopped. I took a deep breath, trying to convince myself it was nothing. That I returned to my room, but sleep eluded me. I tossed and turned, the scratching sound replaying in my mind. Just when I thought I could drift off, I heard a soft whisper coming from downstairs. "Help me." It was faint but unmistakable. My heart raced and I felt a chill run down my spine. Hashtag. Determined to find the source of the sound, I grabbed my phone for light and crept down the stairs. Each step felt like an eternity. The house was dark, the shadows playing tricks on my mind. I reached the living room and scanned the area, but everything appeared normal. Then, I heard it again, clearer this time. "Help me," the voice seemed to come from the kitchen. I hesitated, fear gripping me, but curiosity pushed me forward. I stepped into the kitchen, shining my phone's light around, but it was empty. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. That I turned to leave when suddenly, the back door swung open with a loud bang. I jumped back, my heart racing. The wind had blown it open, but the sudden movement sent waves of panic through me. I closed the door tightly, locking it again, and took a deep breath to steady myself. Just then, I noticed something on the kitchen table, a small old-fashioned key that hadn't been there before. I picked it up, confusion washing over me. Where had it come from? I examined it closely. It was rusty and ornate, unlike anything I had ever seen. My instincts screamed that something was off. Hashtag, feeling brave, or foolish, I decided to explore the rest of the house. I made my way to the basement door, which had always intrigued me, but remained locked. My heart raced as I inserted the key into the lock. To my surprise, it turned easily, and the door creaked open. The basement was dark and musty, filled with old boxes and forgotten furniture. I stepped inside, the air thick with dust. As I shined my phone's light around, I felt a sense of dread settle over me. The whispers grew louder, now echoing through the room. "Help me." I moved deeper into the basement, the light flickering over cobwebs and shadows. And then I saw it, a figure huddled in the corner, shrouded in darkness. I froze, terror coursing through me. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking. The figure slowly turned, revealing a pale face with hollow eyes. "You shouldn't have come down here," it whispered, its voice chilling me to the bone. "They're coming for you." I backed away, panic surging through me. I stumbled over a box and fell to the ground. My instincts kicked in, and I scrambled to my feet, racing toward the stairs. I could hear the whispers growing louder, echoing in my mind. Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag. I burst through the kitchen door, slamming it shut behind me. My heart raced as I locked it again, panting heavily. I could still hear the whispers, but they were fading, replaced by the sound of my own heartbeat. I grabbed my phone and called my parents, my hands trembling. "Mom, Dad, you need to come home," I shouted, nearly in tears. "Something's wrong." "Calm down, honey," my mom replied, her voice filled with concern. "What's happening?" "I don't know, but I think there's someone in the house," I managed to say, glancing nervously at the basement door. "Please hurry." As I waited for them to arrive, I felt a mixture of fear and relief. The whispers had stopped, but I knew I wouldn't be able to shake off the terror of that night. When my parents finally came home, I rushed into their arms. Feeling safe again, did I end the days that followed? I couldn't forget what had happened. I never found out who or what was in that basement, but I knew one thing. I would never be home alone again. The echoes of that night haunted me, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk just beneath the surface of our everyday lives.